We're live?
Yes.
Okay, well, welcome to today's Hangout, our virtual meetup. Today we are joined by Daria from Wikimedia UK and James from Wikimedia DC, as we promised, to talk about their recent survey piloting experiences. Before we do that, we just want to give a little background. It was back in January that both James and Daria approached our team asking for a little help. They were working on survey strategies, and they were hoping we could give them a little consultation, and that's exactly what we're here to help you guys with, as you do try to do different strategies for evaluation. We're here to consult you on those strategies and help to guide you in doing them so that you're successful in designing and as well as collecting and even analyzing those data that you collect. So please reach out if you have a project. To give you a little background, why do we survey? Surveys help to obtain information. Can you select the screen? Sorry, you're supposed to be seeing a presentation. Okay, so why we survey is to collect information that we can't necessarily observe directly. So oftentimes we're looking for like survey of participants' attributes, like what kind of editor are they? Are they a new editor? Are they a comments editor? What project do they edit on? Other demographics such as what gender are they, or maybe what languages do they speak? Other things we can't directly observe are attitudes. So oftentimes we have to actually ask people to self-report what their attitude is about a particular subject or object, and as well as their behaviors. While we can observe some things directly on what they do on the projects, we don't necessarily know what they do when we aren't able to track by the projects. And for some programs where you might only be affecting part of their work, we need them to actually report on how the programs affected their work directly. So surveys can be key to measuring demographics, editing behavior, editing experiences, editing skills, needs for learning, needs for resources, motivations and intentions to contribute in the future, and attitudes about Wikipedia as a source. All common things we hear that are important in measuring goals like increasing awareness of the project, making contributing fun, building an engaging community, increasing support for open knowledge and free content. All of these goals that so many of you probably recognize as shared goals of many programs in Wikimedia. So we have important resources, and I will post this link to both the chat page for these presentation slides so you have the link as well. But we have a learning module on how to design effective questions. We have several learning patterns that you can find in our learning pattern library that relate to surveys. We also have a set of Qualtrics licenses, which if you need to do a larger scale survey and you want to do it online, we do have sort of rolling licenses that we can get access to for program leaders who wish to do a broad survey. Actually, James is presenting some surveys he did through that system, while Daria did hers through a different route using SurveyMonkey. There's also help if you want to do just a basic Google form. You can find lots of help through the Google Forms help online. And, of course, direct consultation with us if you just write eval@wikimedia.org. Importantly, we're also working on a question bank. If you read our recent blog, in the next month you will see populating in our portal where we are actually working with those who develop surveys to share out those questions that we design and, of course, relate them to what objectives they're measuring so that others can translate them or use them as they are, depending on what language. So without further ado, there's our links, and we will pass the mic to James.
Thank you, and good morning or afternoon, good time zone, everyone. I would like to discuss today Wikimedia DC's approaches to program evaluation with respect to the various programs that we conduct. Now, our endeavor with program evaluation began last year, actually. We developed this just about a year ago at this point, and our thought was, what can we do to demonstrate that we are spending our time on doing something that actually achieves a worthwhile outcome? How do we know that we're working towards our goals of improving access to free knowledge, and in the case of Wikimedia DC, we're actively recruiting participants to the Wikimedia projects. How do we know if we're succeeding or not? And so that's when we began working with that program evaluation and design to develop evaluation techniques, and the approaches that we use have mostly centered around surveying participants. Now, the first the first instrument that we use, the first evaluation instrument was a survey that we started handing out at our editathons October of last year. It's very simple, straightforward. Simply, there's just a few questions asking your username, asking whether you're new, if we're hosting an editathon with an organization, if they are staff at that organization. We've asked where they learned of the event. We've asked about their gender to see if we have a gender parity in participation, and these are all more or less surveys that can be completed in a matter of a minute. And the way that we carry it out to get responses, we actually conducted at the event itself, because what we found is that the easiest way to get responses is not by emailing them afterwards or by collecting information from whatever sign-up page, but by actually going to them and asking the information from them directly. See, if you ask them while they're there, then of course they're probably more inclined to respond than if you're bothering them during their day doing other things. Now, another approach that we've taken involves a course that we worked with at American University and a hackathon that we held this past April, the Open Government Wiki Hack. And I will tell you that there are some successes and some failures. With Andrew's class, I worked with Jamie to design three survey instruments. One at the beginning of the course, when they had almost no exposure to Wikipedia from the professor's point of view, who was an experienced Wikipedian teaching a journalism class. There was a survey after they got their initial instruction on how to edit Wikipedia and Wikipedia's culture, where we got to measure the immediate effect of instruction. And then there was a survey administered after the course, which we just distributed, asking, measuring how their opinions have changed after the course. And they're also, with the Open Government Wiki Hack, we gave a survey to everyone who signed up, regardless of whether or not they attended, because we were interested in following up with them. And if they did come, we wanted to learn about the projects they worked on and if they were interested in getting additional support for those projects. Now, designing the survey instruments was fairly effective. We were good at designing it, but it all comes down to administration. And the way to administer surveys is something that we still need to work on, because the approach we have at the editathon works, but it's very labor intensive. And so what I'd like to work on is a more efficient workflow so that the process of checking into the editathon is more straightforward, and that evaluating afterwards takes less effort, because right now our approach is requires a lot of manual computing efforts, and I think it's not impossible for it to be done in a more straightforward manner. That there should be more automation in the back end. And as for the other surveys, for example, with Andrew's class, while the original survey had a 100% response rate because they took it in the class, so no excuses. But with each successive survey, we've seen fewer and fewer responses. In fact, only about half the class responded to the last round of surveys, which is very troubling, and an even lower response rate for the hackathon responses. So the way you administer the survey is very important. You want to get as much information from people at the event as possible. So Wikimedia DC is sort of in the beginning of this learning process. I've personally learned a lot about surveying, about how to ask survey questions. Now I have a political science background, so I already knew some things about surveying, but I very much appreciated the resources of the Wikimedia Foundation in teaching me how to write better surveys, and through experience appreciating how to administer them better. One thing I'm thinking, for example, is that rather than give people long questionnaires, you might want to get as much instant feedback from them as possible. Just quick questions that you ask them right away that require very little of their effort to respond to. But that's the thing, in order to come to these conclusions, you need to have experience first, but with that experience is highly valuable. And you learn a lot about the process, you learn and it makes you actually think about why you're doing these programs. Like, you can host edit-a-thons multiple times a month like we do, but it's more rewarding to think of it not just as each individual event, but as building towards a larger and broader goal. And thinking about that makes you feel more purpose-driven. It makes you feel like you're achieving something, and it's truly a rewarding experience. So are there any questions?
Hey, Sebastian here from the Netherlands. I was wondering, you said that you had trouble of getting feedback from people after the event.
Mm-hmm.
When we have an event, we really reserve time before the event is over for people to have them fill in our questionnaires.
Yes.
So if our events, if it's over at 5:30, I'll ask people to stop doing what they're doing at 5 o'clock. Take 15 minutes to fill in our survey, and as a school teacher, I'm walking around to see if everybody is filling in the survey. For a larger group, you can't do it, but our large events where we need a survey like that is max 30 people. It is like being in high school again, but it works. So have you thought about that?
It's something that we should probably consider more of. I know that at our edit-a-thons, we sort of do, like, in the middle of the event, I start passing around the iPad, having people fill in the questionnaire, and it's just simply my job to make sure that every face in the room fills it out, the form. But as far as administering the longer surveys as part of the event, I think that's a natural step, and I think that actually is a good idea, especially while they still have some fresh perspective on the event, and while they're still there, I think that's how you get a very good response rate, rather than have some after-the-fact responses. But yeah, I think it could work.
I was thinking, hearing your story, and I'm addressing this question to Jamie and her team over there. Why don't we make some simulations of, this could have been an event. This is the survey that you send out, and these are the results to practice, because I really recognize a couple of the problems that you faced and that we faced in the past and probably are still facing at our events. So we want standardization of the surveys that we are sending out. So maybe there should be a set of things we can all practice with because we're seeing the same problems.
This is exactly what the learning pattern library is meant for, and there's actually already some learning patterns in there that are highly relevant to these issues, but I think to review would be really helpful to capture what James has expressed are very common issues with survey collection. So number one, if you have a captive audience, you can... That was our excitement, like, wow, what a discovery, right? Okay, it's like groundbreaking there. So yeah, the more you can get while your audience is still captive, the better you're going to do. Obviously, when you're dealing with a lot of questions, people are tempted oftentimes to use a route that's electronic, so doing an online survey. And it can help to actually prepare to have the online survey, but give them time even there, so that way you still cut out the data entry, but people are there with the time, as Sebastian referred to. And still, people are going to sometimes not take your survey because they don't want to. And I think a second thing that James also faced, at least in the classroom one, is he talked about like collecting more frequent feedback in smaller chunks. And this is the concept of like regular polling. So oftentimes you can't necessarily ask people to do an entire survey at the end of each conference session, but you could have somebody do a quick rating of one thing. And so you see some people have a 1 or 2 question poll and do it more frequently as opposed to like a large chunk survey. Still, we have to deal with the fact that in many cases in Wikimedia programs, there's a separation from who's actually delivering the survey in the context of the captive audience and who is actually the one invested in developing and designing the survey more. So when there's a link to someone else who has to actually integrate it into their time in their course, or if there's some time in a workshop where a volunteer really just wants to have all the minutes for edit-a-thon, it's going to be something that you have to work to coming to a mutual agreement and sort of prioritization of those tasks. So unfortunately, I'm sure everyone will continue to see these things, but yes, having a captive audience, having some sort of incentive to get people to turn it in. In James's case, he didn't mention it here, but one survey got buried in a folder. If it's not like right there prominent for people. They may miss it. Calling attention to the survey, calling attention to why you do a survey. These are all things that help you to get participants to buy in and actually submit the surveys. And these are all things that as you have experiences and you think, hey, this happens to probably everyone, please go to our portal and write a learning pattern. Share with everyone across the movement. We're trying to produce as much guidance as we can, but we can all share in these ways. Like, it doesn't take an expert to notice some things, and that learning library is there to grow. So definitely we're going to be having more and more guidance and tips and things that are easy to find, but feel free to join in that too. And of course, we also have a whole other person who's going to present on her experience. And I think we still have one question actually from Alex.
So my question for you, James, was that you were saying that there was a lot of work put into manually computing things, and I'm just wondering, like, what was the biggest roadblock or barrier in terms of, was it collecting data or putting it together afterwards and analyzing it?
So the largest burden is, so when we collect this data at editathons, we are not just interested in the outcome of that one event, but we're also doing longitudinal studies of our editathons as well. So we see that you attended one event, but which past events have you also attended, and how many individual people are we getting over the course of our entire program? Right now we've gotten close to 100 people, but the effort of putting those usernames together and creating an attendance list is one for which there is no current software solution, so I do it manually. And preparing comma-separated files of lists of usernames and uploading them for analysis is more effort, because right now the form responses don't talk to Wikimetrics, and Wikimetrics doesn't talk to the attendance spreadsheet. And so I think that the best approach to this would be some kind of integrated software where all the parts work together and there is no need for a manual intervention. You automatically get the report that you need, which I think would make program evaluation much easier for those who don't necessarily have the time or interest in investing that much effort into figuring out what their outcome is.
Answer to that. Oh, sorry. One exciting thing to answer to that actually is that the growth team has actually been working on a new extension, well, the campaigns extension, or new workability of the campaigns extension to actually generate cohort lists from your cohort pages essentially on those events on the campaigns extension. So that will get a little bit easier, and as we are able to work in more features work, these are the kind of things we like to hear back for feedback on the Wikimetrics list or directly to our team, so that we know sort of how many people are running into this challenge and for how many people these features are important. So good noticing that and sharing that. But yeah, Wikimetrics can be very time consuming. Getting data from changing cohorts can also be time consuming. Analyzing more than one event and the cross sections of those events can also suddenly eat up a lot more time than you might intend. So if anybody is wondering what that might look like and wants to consult on that in advance, we could probably help with those expectations as well. Any other questions? We will go ahead and pass the mic to Daria.
Right. Does that work? Yes. So I'm Daria. I work as a program manager at Wikimedia UK, and I'm going to be talking about how I used survey to review a whole program. And the particular program I'm going to be talking about is the Wikimedians in Residence. Now I have slides, which I'm going to try and share. I don't know if that's going to work. A bit of an experiment, really. Right. Does this work? Someone give me feedback, please. Okay.
Yes, it works.
Yeah, it works.
Right, okay. Can you see just the slides now? Can you just?
No, we see the whole PowerPoint.
Right. Well, I don't really know how to make that different.
It's okay. I mean, you can
Just present it.
yeah, just present it. You can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Make a notes box.
I don't really know how.
Oh, I know. Am I muted?
No. Go ahead.
Because she needs to share her whole desktop, and then it will.
That's all right.
That's fine.
I'm gonna try and share. I'm gonna try and share desktop again. Was that just the slide?
Yeah. Oh.
Just a slide. Yeah. Is that just the slides?
I guess I'll take a moment to say, for those of you watching on the YouTube Live, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to ask them in the Google Plus page or IRC at Wikimedia Day.
Right. So because I don't know what you can see on the screen. Is it just the slides or is it other stuff?
We can see the slide. We can see just the slide.
Right. Okay. So great. Eventually. I'm going to be talking about the review of the whole program, and I think what it would be most useful for if someone is thinking, if someone's running a particular program and wants to, and is thinking about reviewing it, hopefully it will help by showing what steps I took to do it. So just as a background, the Wikimedia in Residence project is, I'm assuming most people know what it is. It's a type of a partnership between, for example, a cultural institution and Wikimedia community, in a sense, where a resident is placed within an institution and works at cooperation between an institution and Wikimedia community, Wikimedia projects. In UK, we actually had the first ever one 4 years ago at the British Museum, and since then I've tried to introduce a bit more structure into it, in that there were contracts signed between the chapter and the institution, job description, we were writing objectives. However, I was doing all that, but at the same time there was a limited amount of involvement and support after the setup stage, which meant that from a distance, when I was looking at the program, it seemed like it was going fine, it was ticking along, but actually I didn't know for sure if it was, which made me have those lingering doubts whether actually it's going okay. What do others think? Is there even a point in continuing? And it was a problem because it was very sort of one-person sensitive. So it was me looking after it, but I wasn't getting a lot of ongoing current feedback, which made me think sort of by the end of 2013 that I should reflect on the program somehow, see how it's done, what were the successes and challenges, through some sort of a review, and which led to, between March and May this year, looking at opinions of the residents, the host institutions, and the community as well, mostly in UK, but we were asking sort of everyone across the world as well. So my aim there was to improve the program, so kind of innovate, but not by discovering a completely different way of doing things or a completely new program, but by changing what we're already doing for the better, hopefully. And that led me to this thought that, oh, I just want to know what other people are thinking about the program, and I was thinking maybe I can do some sort of a survey, but I wasn't sure what I actually want to find out and how to ask about whatever I was going to find out. And it kind of felt like this sort of disorganized archaeological dig where I'm picking random things up from the floor and seeing if they're okay or not, but there wasn't really much structure to it. And at that point, I thought I could get help from the program evaluation and design team. Does that make sense so far? Like, can people hear me? Yes?
Yes, great.
Good. Okay. So that's when I thought I need help with designing a survey. And now I'm just going to tell you guys what I learned through that process. The first thing, which is kind of obvious, but it in a sense it wasn't for me at first, and I noticed people that I now help with surveys go into the same problem, and in that you need to know what you want to find out before you start writing the survey. I see a lot of people just jumping straight into writing some sort of questions, but without analyzing what areas are you actually wanting to analyze and what questions do you need for the review that you're doing. And I spend a lot of time with Jamie writing out, teasing out from me what I actually want to do for this review. And I'm going to share the presentation with you guys in a second, and it has a couple of links. And one of the links is writing this sort of outline of what were the issues that I wanted to look at. So you can see that later. But for instance, it was stuff like what are the experiences of the residents of the programs? How do they rate the effectiveness of their work against what goals they had in the beginning? What do people think about the host organizations that we've chosen? What should we prioritize? What were the benefits of the program? Stuff like that. And we've written it all out. And from that only, we were creating the questions. And so here's what I've learned about the questions. Depending on what you ask and how you ask the questions, people will tell you different things. So, for example, if you're not actually very sure what you're getting at, the answers will not be helpful either. They will be muddled or kind of unfocused. So one of the questions I was gonna maybe use was, were you happy with the residency? That doesn't... It's just not clear what that question is getting at. And because of that, the answers will not be helpful either. The other thing I learned that the questions need to be there for a reason, but also in some sort of sensible order. So one thing needs to lead from another. It just makes it easier for people to understand what you're getting at through the questionnaire. I've also just gathered a couple of errors that I feel I've made when I was drafting the first questionnaire. One of them was, like I said, the order of questions is important. So, for example, I first asked people, what was your biggest achievement of the residency? And then I asked quite a detailed question about different objectives and asked them to rate how they've met those. I think it would make more sense to do it the other way around. It just flows logically, I think. Then I had questions like, what aspects of the residency did you not enjoy? And the JB was telling to me how that question is not very good because it assumes they didn't enjoy something, which might not be true. And it's not as helpful. The answers might not be as helpful as I would like. So A better question would be to ask about whether, if any, challenges did they meet during the residency, and if so, how would they overcome those questions? From a perspective of the program manager, when I want to make the program better, those are much more helpful. There are a couple more which I'm happy to share with someone that's interested. So this is what I've learned during the creation of the survey. And then came the moment where I was finally happy to send it round. And I used, like Jamie said, I used SurveyMonkey for it, mostly because people in the office and volunteers were used to it in UK, so it was just easy to get going with it. It also tracks who responded to the survey already, which helped me because I could chase people in case I didn't get responses. So what I wanted to talk about now is what I've learned through gathering of the data. Is that okay? Or shall I stop it for a moment for questions?
I have one question.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to know if you included the stakeholders view, and by stakeholders I'm actually thinking specifically of the institutions that have a Wikimedia in residence. If you included their view on defining the outline of what you wanted to know about the program.
So sorry, I didn't get it. So the institutions that had a resident or that didn't have one?
That had.
Sorry, yeah. So maybe I didn't make it as clear as I could. There were 3 separate surveys with overlapping questions. One was for the residents, and they were maybe 7 of them that I sent the survey out to. The other was for the host institutions, like you say, and they had slightly different questions. And again, in my presentations, there will be links to those surveys. You can have a look in a second. And the third one was for the community, because I wanted to see what the general feeling of the volunteers in UK is about them. But you'll be able to see those surveys in a second when I share them. That makes sense?
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Okay. So when I did the SurveyMonkey, that went to those 3 different groups of people. So what I've learned, well, I've learned a lot about the program itself, because I got a lot of feedback, so that goes without saying. But I wanted to tell you a bit about what I've learned through the process of that gathering data. So one thing that I've noticed was it was nice for the community. It sparked some discussion. People were telling me a lot of things that they were thinking about the program. They also felt that the questions were a bit constrained for them, and they wanted to say more than what was in the questions. And for that, we created a separate wiki page in case people had more comments than what was in the questions. The residents were extremely engaged. Everyone filled in the survey. I hardly had to do any chasing up, which just shows that they felt a big part of the program, and they had an interest in feeding back. So I think sometimes it's hard, like James was saying, sometimes it's hard to get people to fill in surveys, but when they feel so strongly about a program, it's easier. For the host institutions, it was a little harder to get them to fill in the surveys. I think it was mostly down to their limited time. But when they did, what was interesting was that a lot of problems I somewhat wasn't aware of came out. And I think maybe they had time to reflect after the residencies were finished, maybe because they were speaking independently of the resident, they felt that they can just say was on their minds without worrying that they'll, I don't know, harm the feelings of the residents. So it was really interesting. I got a lot of good quality feedback from that. After I did the surveys, I ran an in-person brainstorm meeting with the residents, and where I had the summary of the survey, so they could see what sort of in a collective way what other people were saying from the community, for example. And we did like a SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the program. Explore a bit further, get some more recommendations. It was a really good meeting that just explored a bit more what was in the survey already. The last thing I was going to talk about is what I actually did with the data when that all got collected, including the brainstorm meeting. Here I had a volunteer support of a person that was interested in looking at the data and helped me extract some conclusions from it, but just my general reflections. In a sense, it was easy to gather and interpret the numbers, the quantitative data, because it's clear, but also I think you have to have some sort of an understanding what those numbers mean before you can interpret them. And one of my learning points is that I want to know more about interpreting data once you do a survey, because I focused quite a lot on how to make the survey good, but not so much on how to understand the data once you get it back. So that's one thing. The other thing was a lot of my questions were open questions, so obviously you get a lot of qualitative results, just sentences or reflections, and I tried to extract themes from them, so see at what sort of stuff is repeating, and try to weigh them accordingly. So if something is repeated, say, I don't know, 3 or 5 times, I take it to be somewhat more important than if it's just one loud voice highlighting a thing that they wanted to change. One of my learning points here is this was quite a small number of data, maybe 20 surveys. If it was 100 or 200, I would have to have some sort of a system of managing those open questions. It would be a lot of work otherwise. So that's that for analyzing the data. My plans now is to finalize a report that will gather all of those reflections and work on whatever that report says we should do to improve the program. I think those are the most important points. So these are the links that I'll share in a second. So you'll be able to click the links and see what I've created. I've added one link here, Train the Trainer Review. It's another program that we've reviewed last year, and you might be interested in having a look. So is all. How do I join my, like this? Perfect.
Okay. Well, super. Thank you, Daria. I think with some of the things you brought up, I think a really important one is, yes, surveys constrain people's responding. There is a trade-off we make when we do a survey, and we can include some opening questions, but as you discovered, open-ended questions lead to a lot more analysis needs. There's lots of ways to do that, obviously. That thematic analysis that you're attempting is one of the most direct and important ways to analyze, as well as there's a lot of people will then code for sort of code the themes based on maybe affect. So is it a positive, is it a negative about that theme, or is it a neutral comment, or is it something that's suggesting a way of doing something? Is it suggesting a solution, or is it suggesting a challenge? Sometimes that affective coding also helps to filter through those open-ended responses. But importantly, I think we discussed this as we did plan, and it's like, well, how many open-ended questions do you put at the end of the survey? And I think, especially in a wiki world, we do always have the talk page route. You can always send people from the end of the survey to, if you want to discuss the survey more, visit our talk page, and you'll actually get a little bit more action in the wiki way. So we don't have to use only one, and Daria didn't ever intend on using just the surveys. She had always planned on having an in-person session as a follow-up to those survey inquiry. So I think as you look at what capacity you have to do different levels of sort of inquiry, can you spend the time doing the qualitative discussions and dialogues and analyzing those open-ended questions will obviously always matter, but it's a good to have some sort of balance there, and people will always feel somewhat constrained by surveys. But however, that helps us to get even more data from more people, which helps us filter out what's just noise and what's sort of the mode of things.
Yeah, that's the point, because a lot of people there were so many different topics, and I think sometimes that when you're analyzing, you already have some sort of preconceptions and ideas of how the program be changed. You might list other ideas that people are giving you. So I tried not to do that, and that's why I had the volunteer also help me to not have that bias so much. But I don't know what other solutions out there to not be too biased by small.
Daria, if you turn off your video, so it's just your voice, you might not, you're breaking up on our end, so. Or we may have lost her. Okay, so she was actually starting to talk a little more into the facilitation of those in-person dialogues as the follow-up and the challenges of being neutral and really being open to inquiry and not putting your frame on people's responses in that qualitative inquiry. And that's one reason that surveys actually in advance of an open dialogue are helpful, because that way you can actually get a mapping of your participants' range of what they might talk about, and you can sort of check your biases at the door before you even go in. At the same time, having that sort of schematic approach of what the themes might be that you expect is also really helpful walking into one of those dialogues. But as Daria chose to have an outside observer join her, that is one way we can balance that out in addition to our own sort of checks and balances. But checking what happens against our expectations is often where we find that really important sort of positive deviance that we want to follow and say, oh, what is that important thing that we didn't expect? And if you don't analyze your assumptions, at least to know what is the surprise before you go in, you very often could miss the capture. So I think Daria is back.
I think so.
Oh, yes, you are.
Sorry, I don't know.
Okay, so yes, so obviously as we move forward, we have other subjects we could focus these meetups on, including how to do online or in-person facilitation or other strategies that are useful in evaluation. We always invite people who want to either present something they're doing or suggest a theme to please do so either by emailing us or suggesting on the news and events page. At this time, I would ask again if anyone has questions following up to Daria's presentation. Has anyone had any sort of inspirational moments or thoughts of how they might do something different? I think there's a few learning patterns that are still yet to be written. Obviously, the cookies by the back door approach, capturing your captive audience before they leave the room, emphasizing the importance of surveys and what they mean. So this is how we get money and justify whether or not we're planning this event properly, and if we're reaching our goals. If you could please feedback, it matters. Making sure that that's clear to people who are supposed to collect surveys as well as answer surveys will help you to get your response rates up, as well as some of the things like using the online systems follow-up tracking, so that you're doing multiple reminders, not just a one-time request that is ignored by many people. There's lots of tricks, and I hope that we can all continue to share and generate learning patterns in the library and offer our experiences through these virtual meetups or in-person meetups if we should be so lucky. And I will go ahead and leave the space open in case there is any more questions, but if we have no further, we will end in about 5 more minutes.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm really curious about how, for Daria maybe, how did you reach out to the community for them to answer the surveys, and if you use multiple channels, if you find that one of them was more successful than the other, or not? Daria?
Right, I wasn't sure if that's a question for me. So, are you interested in this particular review that I've done?
Yes.
I think my internet isn't great.
Yes. For this particular review that you did for Wikimedians in Residence.
I mean, so I did free surveys for free SurveyMonkey online surveys for 3 different groups, and then a in-person brainstorm for residents, and that was mostly it. So it wasn't. So the differences came not so much from different tools.
Let me rephrase the question. It was, how did you reach out to people to fill in those surveys, the first 3 surveys you did?
Thank you. My internet is failing me. So this was pretty straightforward because it was residencies that I've been working with. So on SurveyMonkey, you can input emails of people. So all I did was send it out through there, and those emails I had already, right, through the residents that I've worked with and through the host institutions that I've worked with also. As for the community, which is much broader, we promoted it on sort of standard chapter communication channels. So it went on the UK chapter mailing list, it went on to our portal, talk space, what we call water cooler, the information about it. I think I've sent it out on Twitter and also to the GLAM related mailing list in case more people had any further comments. All in all, I got, I think, 25 responses. So not that many, but the themes in those responses were quite similar. They were repeating similar reflections, which was useful to know. Sorry, I hope that makes more sense to what you were trying to find out, Maria.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Good.
Also, Maria, I think in Taiwan they're currently doing a survey of the community, and I think that they're doing it as a geo-located banner on the Chinese Wikipedia. So, I think it's targeted to viewers in Taiwan. That's like a much bigger and
Outreach.
just to getting a sense of what the community wants, what they need in terms of offline events. But that is also a tool that can be used not too frequently, because the banners shouldn't be overused, but that is being used too.
Are there any more?
Daria, one more question. Yeah,
Sure.
Daria, how did you document the brainstorm sessions? Because and are those easy to share with other people? Because having a talk with somebody can go can go to anywhere. Did you document them in a way so they can be reused later or be reflected on other brainstorm sessions?
I think so. So let's try. There are a couple of things. So first of all, we recorded it, just in case we need to go back to something in the heat of the discussion. It was a long, I think, about 3 or 4 hours we spent on it. So I've got that.
Sound or video?
Sound to back up. I wouldn't like we were quite. Your mind freely, so to say, but it was there to support our notes. So that was one thing. The other thing that we did recording-wise during the session is we had Flipchart just to drop down the key themes, thoughts we've had. We had the pickle sheet as well. And I was frantically taking notes as well. So that was sort of recording during the session. Now, to keep it focused, I had a SWOT analysis sheets for people. So I just found them. I found on. Oh no, Jamie sent them to me on like an evaluation site, and I can share them with you guys later. So what it did is that I printed those sheets for everyone, and for a couple of minutes, everyone was just jotting down their thoughts on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, to focus their thinking. Those sheets also had key questions to get them to understand what is meant, for example, by a threat. What sort of stuff are you supposed to be thinking about? Then, as for how we've documented that, it was sort of a similar process to what we did with the open questions in the surveys, in that you look through it and you look for themes that are repeated in what people were saying, and from that I was grouping them and making them more ordered, because obviously the conversation did flow quite freely. Now, this is all included in the tidied version of all of this is included in a report that I'm writing, but because I haven't finished it yet, I haven't shared it, but I'm sure I'll send it to you, Sebastian, when I finish, and I'll try and share it as widely as I can once it is done. Is that what you were getting at?
That was exactly the answer I wanted. Thank you.
Oh, fabulous. But I'll send you bits as I find them. Lovely.
So we still have a few more minutes if anyone else has questions or follow-up comments. Otherwise, we can go ahead and end this call. And I know there is upcoming, I can't remember the topic, but Jesse will be hosting a virtual meetup in a couple weeks from now. And there's the one on organizational management that will be scheduled probably for early July. So watch our news page to see what other events, or just make sure you're on our announcement list and keep paying attention to our announcements. We will keep bringing you the content you want, and just let us know what content if you have specific topics. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Just want to say hi, Carl. Thanks for joining.
Don't play favors.
Sorry.
Okay, so we're still at the funny part a little bit here. So sorry, I can't recall what the next topic is. It just got added.
There is one. There's one on the FDC.
Oh yes, that's
annual
right.
plan.
The top outcomes from the FDC annual plan grants.
On June 18th.
So June 18th, you can find that after online as a live recording, or you can join in advance. You can find the links there at the news page in our portal. EEND on Meta. Thanks, and have a nice day. Stay safe out there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.